Observations after a first full week of college football. I'm just going to run through a bunch of the games, little stuff that I saw here and there. The headliner, at least for the rankings, number 2, Ohio State against number 5, Notre Dame. It was 10-7 Notre Dame. I put myself through this exercise when I'm watching games, taking down notes, and I said to myself, will Notre Dame win this game? And I wrote, no. And that's kind of how it felt. Even though they were up, it was a struggle for this Notre Dame offense. Second half, 72 yards on 20 plays. Total domination by an Ohio State defense that had to really kind of carry them through this until Stroud and really the backup running back Williams got things cooking here for Ohio State. So as I had said with Big Cat during the preview part of it, I think looking back to last year's Ohio State defense, and granted they brought in Jim Knowles, which I think every single college football fan has had beaten into his head this entire time. But there's some dudes there. You know what I mean? Like the draft prospect part of it, but some of those guys are just younger. There's a lot of guys making a lot of plays, and it just felt like other than a toss to Mayer from Tyler Buckner, the quarterback for Notre Dame, there wasn't a lot. Like it felt like, what can Notre Dame go to right here to convert a third down that you feel good about? And it felt somewhat limited. On the other side for Stroud, even though Smith and Jigba was in and out of the game, this offense is going to be loaded. Harvin Marison Jr., you've got the return guy, and Mayan, the backup running back, was kind of the story, and he had a huge third down catch as well. So Ohio State, whatever the score was, it felt like that was their game, despite being down a little bit earlier. The game I probably enjoyed as much as anything was Florida and Utah. Now, here's a funny story I'll share with you as well. They were putting up the draft rankings, right? And it said Anthony Richardson, quarterback, who, again, I've watched him last year, number 15. Mel Kiper had him number 12 on his prospect list, not mock draft going 12th, but 12th on the prospect list, which means as a quarterback, he's probably going to go like maybe number 5 or number 6. And I thought, hey, it'd be a really good segment as I look at the prospect rankings or I look at a mock and I just go, hey, here's something I'll do on a Wednesday. If maybe there's a slower news day where I go through Mel or I go through McShay's rankings and I kind of do my own over-under based on what these guys are. And I better do it soon here as the college football season is about to start. And the reason I started thinking out that segment, because I was like 12 for Richardson. I'm like, man, that seems high. Fast forward 2 hours later, it might be low. He is a stud. Now, there are quarterbacks that can run, and there are quarterbacks that can run and only like to run. And he can pass, he can run, but he stays in the pocket. He gives the pocket a chance. He has pocket mobility. He has the arm angle throws down. The 2-point conversion play where he is flushed out, the pocket doesn't even really exist because it's the rollout to his right. Pressure comes crashing down from both angles. He gets into the air, pump fakes a pass, pirouettes, lands, and then runs out clear of the pressure of 2 defensive players and throws it to the back pylon for the 2-point conversion. He's awesome. And I think everybody kind of fell in love with him. And maybe it's just one game or whatever, but to me, that is a big jump up there. And why, when I thought later to that segment, I go, maybe still a good segment idea. Maybe we leave Anthony Richardson out of this. Now for the Pac-12, what does this mean? This is now a 1-8 record when you factor in the next game we'll get to too as well. Oregon's beat down by Georgia. But the Pac-12 is now 1-8 in its last 9 week 1 games against the SEC. Not great. But I'd still feel good about Utah, because this was a coin toss type of game. The interception in the end zone, not maybe what you'd want as far as risk aversion on the play call there. But CJ Rising's been around now. I think he's a tough kid. I think he's a good quarterback. So I like him. Keithy, the big tight end, number 80, I believe, is an absolute matchup nightmare. And the best part about this for Utah is I thought they won on offense in the line of scrimmage all night. I thought their O-line was pushing Florida back. So I felt like that group, that was a win. So you do the SEC toughness stuff that drives everybody else crazy, and sometimes it's right, and sometimes it's just applied to teams that don't deserve it. In this case, this wasn't about Utah, some Pac-12 team coming down to the swamp and getting their asses kicked all over the place by depth and D-line, which is sometimes the right version of the story. I don't think that's really what this was. So despite the 1-9 record now, or excuse me, the 1-8 record for the Pac-12 schools, disappointing loss at the end of this, it's a coin toss result that should probably not be magnified out to meaning that Utah couldn't hang with one of the big boys in the SEC. And again, with Florida unranked coming into this, but with Richardson and the 2, Johnson and Etienne, who looks terrific. I don't know enough about the receivers at this point. It looks like, Richardson may have to carry them a little bit here. I'm not sure about the D line because I thought Utah was winning again, like I said in that matchup. Although there was that number 21, the D tackle who's over 400 pounds, that when they went the back line camera on that one, the back judge camera angle, his ass took up the entire, it was like 55 inches of screen and about 30 inches of ass in that one. So there was a lot going on there in the middle, but I thought Utah physically held up really well and, blew it at the very end. So I don't think Utah should be leaving there feeling like they can't match up with one of, again, we don't even know necessarily where Florida is in the SEC tiers right now, but it looks like probably an improvement from a disastrous end of last year. Speaking of improvement, is it possible Georgia's better? Let's hold off on, well, it's just going to be Georgia and it doesn't matter. Let's play a couple more weeks. Is that all right? But boy, was that impressive. 49-3 against Oregon. Stetson Bennett, how good is he? And are we dicks about height? He's really good, and yes, we are dicks about height. His Heisman odds before the season started, FanDuel, 100-1. They were behind Spencer Rattler and about 7 or 8 running backs. He's now 20-1 on FanDuel if you still want to get in on that. Apparently, he was only 1.7% of the entire action on the Heisman odds. So people weren't looking at him as a Heisman guy. Remember, last year, again, with the national title, but there was always the JT Daniels story, which, by the way, that former USC Daniel Slovis matchup, backyard brawl, Pittsburgh, West Virginia, probably one of my favorite games of the entire week. But we always kind of felt like, all right, Stetson's there, but they'll probably do something else at some point. I thought he was so locked in. He was precise. He wasn't forcing anything. Granted, your defense is humiliating Oregon on the other side, so maybe you're not pressured enough to go ahead and do some of these things. But he was 4th in QB rating last season when I'll admit, like a lot of people were like, nice little story there, but whatever, does it really matter? I don't know. Maybe I'm opening my mind up. We'll ask Dilfer about this a little bit later of what Stetson Bennett could actually be, because he looks like a really good quarterback. And that's still with some limitations, I think, at the receiver position, because as Kirk Herbstreit said on a preview show that made me kind of go, wait, is he right? He said not only is this the best tight end room in the country, maybe the best tight end room of all time. Whenever you throw an all time on there, it makes me notice, unless I think your content is garbage. And I think Kirk Herbstreit's content is not garbage. It's great. And then I started thinking, well, wait a minute. All right, well, Bowers is totally unfair. Washington, the 6'7" guys like Anthony Mason out there, who I do think like his hands maybe be a little bit more consistent, but red zone, absolute matchup nightmare, a huge recruit coming in. And then Eric Gilbert, if you watched at LSU, who transferred in, he was the number one tight end in his class. And as soon as you saw him as a freshman at LSU, you're like, this guy's like a top 10 pick. This is insane what this guy can do. And then he transfers in there. And then they brought in the number 3 tight end, Delp, a kid who's actually from Georgia. You're like, wait, why are you going to go to this school? He was the number 3 tight end, goes to Georgia's hometown school and all that kind of stuff. Gilbert, I don't even think got in the game until a little bit later. I'm actually a little surprised he would transfer there, considering, this is the room that actually doesn't need you. And he has to be locked into the football part of this, because I think towards the end, he, like some other LSU players, weren't entirely signed up for the assignment. So that's the Georgia side of it. As far as Bo Nix, welcome to the show. Bo Nix broke the hearts of Oregon Ducks fans 3 years ago with an impossible throw that somehow worked out. We saw his dad in the stands 100 different times. Bo Nix is an adventure, and honestly, I think over a full season, it's an adventure that you're not totally excited for. But the first pick wasn't really his problem. The corner made an unbelievable catch on that. The second pick was brutal. They didn't really have much of a chance. They couldn't seem to block anything there with Georgia, and Georgia looks loaded up again. And when I picked them to be outside of the playoff, because I was like, maybe a little bit of a national championship hangover, I get a call from somebody who knows, not from Georgia, but somebody who talks to guys at Georgia. It's like, just a heads up on your Georgia thing, because they're thrilled with their roster. And they're like, this is a joke again. And go ahead and doubt us if you want, especially if Bennett is a little bit better. So keeping track of the transfers. Remember that Finley went to Auburn from LSU, and he beat out Calzada, and then another Oregon backup who transferred there, who beat out Calzada for the backup to Finley. And then Bo Nix was like, I'll go to Oregon, where again, one of the other Oregon QBs ended up in Auburn. This will make sense a little bit later. Quick notes on the ACC, NC State, ECU. Look, Devin Leary, the quarterback for NC State, physically is that guy. He's worth paying attention to. App State scores 40 points in the fourth quarter against UNC. Are you kidding? And then Old Dominion beats Virginia Tech. So not great, Bob, for the ACC at the start of these things. Here's a QB line from Max Olson of The Athletic. Speaking of the transfers and trying to keep up with this stuff. Of the starters that we had this week, there's 131 FBS college football programs. 60 were transfers. 40 were transfers this cycle. So the next time some transfer who was, big time guy, Power 5, decides to bounce from one Power 5 to the next, and then you hear in the spring it's an open competition. It's not. Because if that guy's good enough to transfer somewhere else that's a decent school, that means there's another 10 schools that would take him. And at some point, someone's going to have to guarantee him that the starting spot is him. But then he'll say, hey, we're going to make sure it's a competition. It's not a competition. Almost every single one of these guys starts. 1/3 of the college football landscape has a starting quarterback to start this year who was part of the most recent transfer cycle. That is an insane number. On the bets, Arkansas, Cincinnati winner. I don't think I've ever heard an announcer as much as Rod Gilmore want Cincinnati's quarterback to be benched in that game. Bryant, who originally was at Cincinnati, then left for one of the Michigan schools, smaller ones, and then came back to Cincinnati, another transfer in there. We're close in that game. Arkansas wins it. That was a winner. The loser, LSU. All right, let's discuss that game late last night. Van Lathan comes down to hang out, Baton Rouge guy. We're sitting there, and we're like, how do you feel? And he's like, I don't know. I don't feel great. He called it. He's like, I don't like this O-line. Then we started talking about Jaden Daniels, the Arizona transfer. I said, I don't know if they made him the starter because he's awesome, because he was dynamic as a freshman. And then you kept watching Arizona State, and you're like, I don't know. This is kind of falling apart. I think he trusts to run a little bit more. I think what we're seeing here, not to say that Nussmeier, the backup, because Max Johnson, who is the other backup, is now in Texas A&M. There's a theme here. Daniels transfers to LSU. He's probably told he's going to be the starter. They can pretend that he wasn't told that, whatever. Then the official announcement wasn't until very, very late. But Daniels may be the starter because this LSU line can't block. The O-line has major problems. Freshman at left tackle, a fifth-year guy at right tackle that wasn't having a great night on top of everything else. And so as we're watching the game play out, Florida State's converting every third down, 8 of their first 12. Jordan Travis, quarterback now, second year as a starter for Florida State. He's terrific. He is really, really good. Much better quarterback than I thought Daniels was for the entire night. And yet you're going, wait, LSU's going to have a chance at this? They go almost 99 yards to tie it until they have the blocked extra point from the side, which doesn't really happen that often on extra points. They had the 2 punt fumbles by Neighbors on the returns. They had the field goal that was blocked on top of all this stuff. And so you're left with wondering what's going on. And by the way, Butte, one of the best receivers in the entire country. I don't know what was going on with his routes. Was he so upset about not getting the ball early? He only had like 4 targets, I believe. One of the targets was on him for not getting it. Butte unfollowed and erased all the LSU content and then had to be consoled on the sideline. I don't know what that means. Unfortunately for LSU fans, it's been a long stretch of guys that don't seem to want to be there. But with Brian Kelly in place, you feel like, okay, the Coach O stuff, now it's sort of over. Things just didn't seem to be super locked up. And a lot of players that didn't want to be there. I don't know if this means it's just a frustrated kid after a night of not catching enough balls. But if you look at the difference between Travis from Florida State going through his reads and Daniels, who I don't think goes through a ton of reads and wants to still run first, he may be out there because he's just better equipped to deal with an offensive line that can't necessarily block him. And on top of Mason Smith, their best defensive player, looks like tearing up his knee on that first series. And then Ali Gay, who's trying to headbutt Travis. I have no idea what he was doing, defensive captain there. So not a great night for LSU. And predictably, people just hate Brian Kelly. And I don't love that he left when his team was going into a playoff, but I'd like to see how many other people would turn down $100 million to go coach at one of the elite programs in college football. It's not great. It's the way business works. Business isn't always great. But man, and then it kind of was the Nebraska thing of LSU being the only game on and all of the mistakes, getting that close, coming back, and then ultimately blowing it that way. LSU fans, just national media, national fan base does not like your head coach. Speaking of social media, a moment, if you allow it. I have a lot of friends. I have people that I'm not friends with that cover football. And this time of year, really seemed to pick up the momentum this lead up to it. It's like, man, I love football, but ... What's the ... You're going to be busy now? Yeah, it's called a job. I get it. You're going to be away from the family a little bit more. You're going to have to get on a couple flights. You're going to have to stick around after the game's done. Maybe get some post-game react. Have to check in on a practice. Chase down the story. In college football, if you just cover one team and they're good, you may go on the road 4 or 5 times. In the NFL, you're going to go on the road, 8 or 9 times. The other times you're going to be home. You're going to be home during the week. You're going to be putting the kids to bed most nights. If you have kids, some of you even have help. I think the travel part of it, again, it's It's single digits. It's probably single digits flights. And it's the shortest season of any of the sports. College, you're going to be done beginning of January. The NFL, if your team's any good, maybe it goes into February. Maybe if you're a national guy, you have to go Super Bowl, whole deal. I just wanted to point something out. I want to talk about this thing called baseball. They go 162. You know when they have off days? It's called the random Monday or Thursday. And that's when you're on a plane getting to the next city where you watch 3 or 4 games in a row. And then you fly to the next one. Sometimes you're gone for like 2 weeks. And then you come back and then you leave again. And that season starts in like February. And sometimes the guys on the team called pitchers and catchers get there even earlier than the rest of the team. And that means you have to go down there too. And then if your team is good, you sit there from February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, the dog days, and then into October because they keep expanding the playoffs. And then it could even go into November. And then they have an offseason called the Hot Stove League. You got to stay on top of that too. So I'm just pointing out that maybe, these jobs that we have, they're pretty cool. Like we just talk about sports the whole time. When you cover football, it's the easiest of the sports to cover. Rant over.